This episode of the Rotary Voices podcast is brought to you by Archaeological Paths. Explore Egypt with renowned archaeologists. Visit www.archaeologicalpaths.com for more information.
From Rotary Magazine, this is the Rotary Voices podcast. I'm Andy Choi. In early 2024, Rotary International sponsored an exhibit at the Chicago Center for Photojournalism. The exhibit was titled Chasing Polio, shot by Jean-Marc Giboux. Jean-Marc is a Chicago-based photojournalist who spent 18 years traveling across 17 countries to document the effects of polio and the wide-ranging fight to eradicate it. Chasing Polio captures this journey, documenting the unprecedented public health initiative through Jean-Marc's lens. Jean-Marc was born and raised near Paris, France, before he moved to Los Angeles, California in the United States to cover news, social issues, and cultural trends for U.S. and European publications. Nearing the turn of the century, Jean-Marc wanted to cover something big. He became interested in the work to end polio and reached out to Rotary International, hoping to document it. By the end of 1997, his polio coverage had been picked up by Life magazine. Soon enough, he was swept away by the vulnerable children and polio survivors he had met, the remote areas he'd visited, and the tireless work of volunteers and health workers he'd seen across polio eradication efforts worldwide. In this episode of the Rotary Voices podcast, Rotary Magazine senior staff writer Diana Schoberg sits down with Jean-Marc Giboux to discuss the obstacles he's faced in capturing his images, the highlights of his journey, and what he looks for in a good picture.
Welcome to the Rotary Voices podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So can you tell us, how did you get started in photography?
It's a long time ago, but it started in junior high school. I had an art teacher who gave us a course of black and white photography, and I got into a dark room and I just fell in love with it. It changed my life. There was always photography in my life. And started working in the basement with the dark room, and then little by little I figured out that's what I wanted to do. I struggled and I had a lot of other jobs to get there, but I got new cameras, bought equipment, started selling pictures in high school, and here I am.
It sounds like you're living like every high school kid's dream.
Yes, it's been pretty amazing. It took quite a way to get there, but probably making it more enjoyable.
Now, you grew up in France. How did you end up in Chicago?
I knew what I didn't want to end up doing in France, and I started working, making money, traveling the world, taking pictures, trying to come back and trying to sell them. I did that for a few years and it didn't really work that great. And then I did a trip to the US and I went to California and San Francisco and I started doing the same thing. So I started working more in California, then moved to Los Angeles where it was more happening at the time. I would work for a few months, save money and go on a trip. I went to China once. I loved it. I went back to China. And when I entered China, they were opening Tibet. And I was one of the first people going into Tibet without an escort. So I didn't sell the story, but this story opened the door for a major news photo agency, which was at the time Gamma from Paris and Gamma Liaison in New York. So this opened the door for me to sell my work. And then I started producing work in pretty much in California aimed at the European market.
You photographed polio eradication efforts for 18 years. How did you get your start?
In 1997, I read a story in the Tribune, and it was talking about the project of eradicating polio by the year 2000. As a freelance photographer, I was looking for a great story for the millennium. So after reading the article, there was one link that I noticed that was in Chicago, Evanston. It was Rotary. So I called Rotary, and we worked out a deal where Rotary, they gave me a grant to cover the story for a year. I picked 5 places in the world which represented the challenges of polio eradication. I went to Turkey, I went to CDC in Atlanta, I went to India, Nepal, Ethiopia, and at the end of the year, it was picked up by Life magazine. After doing the work for 1 year, with Rotary and getting published in Life magazine, I get a call from the World Health Organization. Oh, nice. And they say to me, hey, do you want to go to Sierra Leone? I said, of course, I want to go to Sierra Leone. Then I put the phone down and I'm looking. There was no Google, so I look on the encyclopedia. Where is Sierra Leone? And then I found out, Sierra Leone is this country in West Africa, and it's in the middle of a civil war. As we are doing polio vaccination, trying to catch refugees, we are coming into Freetown. Freetown is the main city in Sierra Leone, and it was surrounded by an army of rebels who are trying to take over the country. And as we are looking for refugees, we could hear the big guns going off in the jungles as they were trying to delay the arrival of the rebel army. And so we did this for a few days, and then one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a knock on my door, and he said, pack up, we got to leave. So we got evacuated. And a week or two later, the rebels took over Freetown. And it was one of the bloodiest coups in West Africa, and they have a lot of bloody coups. But I always felt bad because all the people I worked with, I never know what happened to them. There were nurses, there were doctors, and I never heard anything from them anymore. And I say, this doesn't hit you when it's happening. It hits you when you're going home. And I'm sure it's the same for soldiers or people who've been witnessing intense stuff. But it hits you later when you have time to process it. When this is happening, you don't really have time to process it. You pack up, you get into the taxi, we get into the bush. There's a little bush taxi plane waiting for us, and there's 10 of us, and we fly to the Ivory Coast, the country next door. And then you end up in Ivory Coast and you get access to showers and all these things and starting to hit you. I'm not going to see these people again. Where are they? What's going to happen to them?
You had one of your photos used in anti-vaccination campaigns. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was very interesting. It was during the pandemic, actually. In 2020, I started getting these calls and emails. There was AP, Reuters, Bloomberg, and they all sent me the same picture. And it was a picture from Sierra Leone. And it was a picture of a child who was really in bad shape. I mean, he was living on all four. He had shoes on his hands. And in the background, there was another group of kids who were on crutches with limbs that were affected. It was pretty strong pictures. I didn't put it in the exhibit because it's a little too intense. But then it was circulating and it was hijacked by anti-vaccination people who hijacked the picture and said, the comment was, this is what happened when Bill Gates tested the COVID vaccine on children in Africa. That's what they were using it for, to scare people. Also, it was always against Bill Gates. I don't know why, but it was complete hijacking of the picture of the message. So every time I had to say, yes, I took that picture. It was in 1998, and this child was never vaccinated, and this child is a victim of polio. And I never heard from them again. I think maybe they were able to fight it, but it's already been used. The impact of it is already done.
How does it feel to have your work used like that?
Well, it doesn't make me very happy. It's just the opposite of what I want to portray. But I'm glad they contacted me.
One of the images from that shoot was a beautiful photo of some school children sitting in their uniforms. Could you describe that photo a bit for us?
Yes, it was called the Cheshire Home for Handicapped Children. And actually, it's the same place where I took the picture that was hijacked by the anti-vax community. Same group of kids, just a few different ones, but they had this place which was a shelter for these kids. They were able to get an education, but there was no reconstructive surgery. They were just managing. You can stop the progress of the virus, of the disease, but you cannot repair what has been damaged. So half of them were paralyzed, and they were brilliant little kids. They were playing soccer, but they were playing soccer on the ground, on all four. Their spirit was always great.
When we return, Jean-Marc shares his experience working with volunteers and health workers, photographing milestone moments in the polio eradication efforts, and what he looks for in a good photo. Stay with us.
RoyalEgypt.com presents Explore Egypt on a tour like no other and gain exclusive VIP access to Egypt's greatest wonders. Take a VIP tour of the Grand Egyptian Museum, the largest archaeological museum in the world, with one of its directors. Enjoy a private visit to the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and access it in chambers that are closed to the public. Stand between the pose of the Great Sphinx instead of seeing it from a distant viewing platform. Explore the most awe-inspiring wonders of the ancient world. Temples in Lagza, the Valley of the Kings, and King Tut's tomb outside the regular hours for a more intimate and crowd-free experience. Don't miss your chance to join this once-in-a-lifetime journey. Book your tour now at RoyalEgypt.com.
You've had some harrowing experiences during your coverage. Can you tell us about a few of those?
So one of them was in Nigeria. Northern Nigeria is the hotbed and the center for polio transmission in Africa. Most of the viruses in Africa could be traced back to northern Nigeria. So that was one of the big stories, I think, for the polio eradication, to go to Kano in northern Nigeria. So I arrived in Kano and same thing, you live and learn. Kano actually, they have Sharia law, which means there is a lot of restriction in public life. One of them is taking pictures. The first morning, I just go out with my camera on the shoulder and I start walking around. And in this marketplace, I just see there is people selling tomatoes and right next to a sewage, little river next to them. And I thought that could be interesting, talking about polio. As I'm walking into the market, I hear somebody calling, you. I'm not, I know the story about kidnappings in Nigeria, so I'm just moving a little faster into the crowd until somebody grabs me. And I turn around and there's these big guys telling me, you got to come with us. First of all, I don't know who they are. They are in civilian clothes. So I'm resisting. I said, no, I'm not coming with you. And I'm making a big scene. I want people to see me. I don't want them to just take me away. And then I see a policeman in uniform. So I free myself and I run to the policeman. And I ask him, who are these people? Are they legit? And he said, yes, they are immigration or they are police. So I get in the car with them and they take me to their headquarters where they make me wait for hours. They take my passport. And luckily, I had a contact, a Rotarian in Kano. So I was able to call him and he came by and finally they kept my passport and I went back to my hotel, told me, stay in the hotel, you are not allowed to take pictures, come back tomorrow and we'll deal with your passport. And I was also on assignment with Rotary and the World Health Organization. I had a paper, I had a journalist visa, everything was legit on my side. So I go back to the next day and same thing, we have to wait for hours and we're waiting to see the big chief. I don't know which department, but it's law enforcement. And we get in there, and right away he's starting to lecture me about, you are not allowed to take pictures, and then he kicks me out of the meeting, and things happen between him and the Rotarians. And I believe there was something being paid to get my passport back. They never told me, and then after that I was able to work in the city without any problems.
What has been your experience working with Rotary members?
Some places, they were my contacts, especially places like India or Nepal, even Bangladesh. Kano, I'm glad there was one. Otherwise, I may be still in jail there.
Were there any interesting resulting photos from that trip?
Yeah, it was great. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting. I was able to go with a group of vaccinators in the old city and going into Quranic schools and all these places. You just see something that I would not see as a tourist otherwise, And they did great.
Vaccinators give the polio vaccine in really difficult to reach places. Can you tell us about some of the journeys you've had to take to follow these teams?
Getting there was sometimes the most challenging. Part of my strategy about covering polio vaccination is that taking a picture of a polio vaccination, it's okay once, but if I can associate the polio vaccination drive with what's happening in the world at the same time, then it puts it in perspective and people understand that this is happening while everything else is happening. In 2004, there was a Darfur crisis and there were few 100,000 refugees in Chad on the border with Sudan. They've been chased by the militias. And I decided to go and see the polio vaccination in this place. So just getting there was very difficult. I had to go to Jamena in Chad, clear the papers with the government to get there. Then I had a contact with Doctors Without Borders. They were the one handling healthcare on the border. So with them, I took a flight there. Then I took a drive for a few hours. And then I stayed in the camp. I would just follow them on their daily routine to go do their vaccination. And I did that for a few days. And that was always interesting because you get into people's private space and you just really see what's happening. I have to say that the polio program allowed me to get into those places.
How did you gain the trust of people in these sorts of sensitive situations, whether politically sensitive or because people had been disabled by polio? What kind of strategy did you use?
Spending time with the people is the first thing. And usually it's like spending time with vaccinators. And I would spend my whole day with them. But I have to say that the reception we had, I said 99% of the time was good. People wanted the vaccination. When you live in a country where there is polio, you see polio victims every day, and okay, I'm a little older, but when I was a kid, there was always a polio victim in the class. There was a kid who was walking with crutches. So I understood what polio meant. But when you're in India, you see polio victims begging every street corner because there is just no solution for them to make a living. They are victimized by the disease. So when you go into a village and people see how difficult it is to have a child who gets polio, then they understand. They want the vaccination. They have many, many worries in their life to make a living, to feed the family. It is one less worry.
You've had the opportunity to photograph some milestone moments in the polio eradication campaign as well. You have a photo in particular of some nurses in India after that milestone. Can you describe that photo and tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the lighter and an easier picture I took. There was this big gathering of nurses, and they were celebrating the first year of a polio-free India. That was my last assignment with Rotary. And I was following the polio ambassador, who was this Brazilian model, Isabelle Fontana. So she was giving a speech to those nurses, and it was obvious that pictures was beautiful. The lines, the visuals, the composition was perfect. There must be about 50 or something nurses all wearing the same outfit. It's white and it's black. Only one of them is looking at me, something I like too. I like not to be part of the picture. And it's just a beautiful picture.
What do you look for in a good photo?
Well, there is everything. There is composition, of course. There is a light and everything. But as far as lighting, I have to say I don't always choose the situation. I wish it was always on a beautiful sunset, but it's not happening. But I like emotions. I like the pictures to bring some emotion to somebody. You can say, oh, this picture is pretty. That's it. Okay, it's a good picture and it's intense or it's strong and it's conveying something of a message. I like that. That's what I'm looking for. And it's not easy. There's many pictures where they're looking at me. I just don't use them because I want to capture something that's happening like I'm a fly on the wall. I remember going into tents in a refugee camp in Pakistan, and right away people are looking at me because who is that guy? We've never seen somebody like him around us. And then the thing is happening. The polio vaccine is coming out, and then you're dropping the drop, and then they're not looking at me anymore. They are looking at the action, and that's when I'm taking the picture.
Which photo are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a tough question. There is a few, I have to say. As a photographer, I can associate how difficult it was to get the picture, making it more precious to me. An editor would probably not see the same thing. Afghanistan was intense for me. Getting into Afghanistan just after the fall of the Taliban, these pictures are important to me because they opened something for me. I've never been to Afghanistan, and I was not in that situation before, which led to me being more in those situations later on. I got more familiar with those situations of war, but pretty much I understood that I care about the humanitarian issues in the world. And that pretty much drove my work with polio or with other subjects.
What impressed you most about covering the polio campaign?
It's like an ant farm. As we're speaking, there is thousands of people going door to door. It's happening since 1988 when they started it. But you could say that any time almost during the year, I know at the beginning of the year, it's going to be the National Immunization Days in India. I know people are going door to door to do it. I know it's happening in Ethiopia. It's happening in all these places. That's pretty amazing because, sure, there is financing of the campaign from the top down, but the campaign is done from the bottom up. It's people, teachers, nurses, health workers. So everybody is involved, and there are hundreds of thousands of people doing it.
Thinking about the future, what uncovered story do you wish you could hop on a plane and do right now?
I'm looking for one. I have a folder full of stories to cover. It's just a matter of which one is coming first. I think maybe something that doesn't last 18 years would be good. But I'll do that until I can press a shutter.
Jean-Marc, thanks for coming on the Rotary Voices podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Jean-Marc Giboux is a Chicago-based photojournalist who spent 18 years covering polio and polio eradication efforts across 17 countries. Visit www.giboux.com to explore his portfolio. To learn more about Jean-Marc's polio coverage, check out his story in the October 2024 issue of Rotary magazine. If you'd like to support Rotary's efforts in eradicating polio, visit endpolio.org.
This episode of the Rotary Voices podcast was produced by J.P. Swenson and edited by Wen Huang. Rotary Magazine senior staff writer Diana Schoberg hosted the interview. Production by Yusu Kim. I'm Andy Choi. If you enjoyed the show, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and share it with your friends. The Rotary Voices podcast is produced by Rotary Magazine, the official monthly publication of Rotary International. Thanks for listening.